What happens when a nominee for Secretary of Defense suggests the rules of war are outdated? This isn't just a political debate. It's a fundamental challenge to the principles that have governed armed conflict for generations. We're about to dissect a tense confirmation hearing that exposes a deep divide in how America sees its role on the world stage. The core question is this: is the nominee a pragmatist pushing for necessary changes to fight modern enemies? Or is he advocating for a dangerous departure from the laws that separate soldiers from killers? Let's look at the key exchange that reveals everything.
Senator.
You've made several references to your religion today. I share that devotion to Christianity, but I must say I've been reminded somewhat of Saul on his way to Damascus. You seem to have been converted over the last several weeks and several months. You wrote in your book just last year that, but if we're going to, this is the book, War on Warriors, but if we're going to send our boys to fight, and it should be boys, we need to unleash them to win. Later on, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men. Which is it? Is it only boys can fight? I mean, you've testified here today that you believe in women in combat, but you didn't just last year. How do you explain your conversion?
Senator, my testimony is clear. Writing a book is different than being Secretary of Defense, and I look forward to leading the men and women of our military. And my comment there, Senator, was about the burdensome rules of engagement that members of our generation, men and women, have seen on the battlefield. And one thing President Trump changed in meaningful ways that led to meaningful developments on the battlefield. When President Trump took control in the first term, ISIS was raging across Iraq, and as someone who spent a lot of time there with other men and women who invested in that mission, it was a very difficult moment to see the black flag of ISIS fly. And what President Trump did was untie the hands of warfighters. He changed the rules of engagement, untied the hands of warfighters, and allowed them to complete their mission and crush ISIS. It has not just tactical implications, operational and strategic implications, how you allow warfighters to go about winning and fighting their wars. President Trump understands that, and within the laws of war and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we are going to unleash warfighters to win wars so that wars don't drag on forever, as our generation has seen.
So are you rejecting Title 18 and Title 42, I think, also has provisions that incorporate the Geneva Convention and the laws of armed combat? Are you saying that those laws should be repealed? That is the law of the land right now.
Senator, we have laws on the books from the Geneva Conventions into the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and then underneath that you have layers in which standard or temporary rules of engagement are put into place. We fight enemies also, Senator, as our generation understands, that play by no rules. They use civilians as human shields.
So are you saying
they target women and children?
The Geneva Convention should not be observed?
We follow rules. We follow rules, but we don't need burdensome rules of engagement that make it impossible for us to win these wars.
You're saying two different things. You're saying we follow rules, but we don't have to follow the rules in all cases. Is that correct?
Senator, I'm making an important tactical distinction that warfighters will understand, that there are the rules we swear an oath to defend, which are incredibly important, and this committee understands and helps set them. And then there are those echelons above reality, from, corps to division to brigade to battalion, and by the time it trickles down to a company or a platoon or a squad level, you have a rules of engagement that nobody recognizes. And then it makes you incredibly difficult to actually do your job on the battlefield. That's the kind of assessment and look that an Army major will give to this process if I was confirmed to be the Secretary of Defense.
Your quote is
true understanding of that.
Your quote in 2024, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago. That would be the Geneva Convention. America should fight by its own rules, and we should fight to win or not go in at all. Are you saying that the Geneva Convention provisions, which clearly outlaw torture of prisoners, should not apply in the future?
Senator, how we treat our wounded, how we treat our prisoners, the applications of the Geneva Conventions are incredibly important. But we would all have to acknowledge that the way we fought our wars back when the Geneva Conventions were written are a lot different than the asymmetric, non-conventional environment of counterinsurgency that I confronted in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor in Afghanistan. My job was to understand how the Taliban and al-Qaeda operated so that NATO units coming in could be informed of what was happening. They knew our rules of engagement, and when they were more restrictive, they took advantage of them, and it put our men and women in a more dangerous and difficult place.
And you believe
For future wars we fight, we need to have someone atop the Pentagon, sir, who understands how those ripple effects
Well, I just want
impact
to
the men and women
understand
in
your
uniform.
position. Your position is torture's okay. Is that correct? Waterboarding, torture is no longer prohibited given the circumstances of whatever war we're in. Is that correct?
Senator, that is not what I said. I've never been party to torture. We are a country that fights by the rule of law, and our men and women always do. And yet we have too many people here in air-conditioned offices that like to point fingers at the guys in dark and dangerous places, the gals in helicopters in enemy territory who are doing things that people in Washington, D.C. would never dare to do, or send, in many cases.
In one of your interviews, you said they're willing to do this. You're talking about Donald Trump and Senator Cruz. They're willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant. Is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours. But what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective.
Right,
we give them everything they need, and then we stand behind them with the rules of engagement that allow them to fight decisively to defeat America's enemies, which is why we say
I just have a few seconds left,
Mr.
Mr. Hegseth, if you could. I was very disturbed in your opening statement where you talked about the priorities that you have. We will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the Communist Chinese. There's not a single mention in this statement about Ukraine or Russia. Is this code for we're going to abandon Ukraine?
Senator, the president, that's a presidential level policy decision. He's made it very clear that he would like to see an end to that conflict. We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is. We'd like to see it as advantageous for the Ukrainians as possible, but that war needs to come to an end.
You talk a lot about deterrence of China. I would submit that Xi Jinping is watching what we do very carefully. If we abandon Ukraine, that would be the strongest signal possible to Xi Jinping that he...
This entire exchange is a masterclass in political pressure. The senator's strategy is clear. Use the nominee's own words from his book, War on Warriors, to expose a fundamental contradiction. He isn't just asking questions. He's creating a narrative of a man who is either conveniently changing his tune for the sake of confirmation or who genuinely holds beliefs that run contrary to established U.S. and international law. By repeatedly bringing up the quote about rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago, the senator is forcing the nominee to either defend or disavow his criticism of the Geneva Conventions. Notice the nominee's response. He consistently tries to reframe the debate. He creates a distinction between the foundational laws of war, which he claims to respect, and the burdensome rules of engagement that he argues hamstring soldiers on the ground. This is a clever tactic. It allows him to sound like a practical, pro-soldier leader who understands the grim realities of the battlefield while avoiding a direct rejection of international law. However, the senator doesn't let him off the hook, pressing him on whether this distinction allows for things like torture and waterboarding. The nominee's refusal to give a simple yes or no answer, instead deferring to the law of the land or pivoting to the difficult job of soldiers, is itself the most telling answer. To understand the stakes, we have to be clear about what's being discussed. The Geneva Conventions are not just some dusty 80-year-old documents. They form the bedrock of international humanitarian law, dictating the humane treatment of prisoners, civilians, and the wounded. The senator's line of questioning highlights three crucial themes. First, the nominee's credibility and consistency. Second, a potential philosophical shift away from the rule of law in warfare. And third, the real-world consequences of American foreign policy, as seen in the final questions about abandoning Ukraine. This hearing is about more than just one man's nomination. It taps into a much larger and ongoing debate within the United States military and political establishment, a debate supercharged by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The nominees' arguments voice a real frustration felt by many soldiers who fought against enemies that followed no rules, used civilians as shields, and exploited restrictive Western rules of engagement. The core of his position is that in an era of asymmetric warfare, adhering to old conventions puts American soldiers at a disadvantage. However, the senator's questioning highlights the profound risks of that philosophy. Abandoning or selectively applying principles like the Geneva Conventions has serious consequences. It erodes America's moral authority on the global stage. It potentially puts American soldiers at greater risk if captured, as the principle of reciprocity, we treat your prisoners well, so you treat ours well, is broken. And as the senator points out in his final pivot, it sends a powerful signal to adversaries. If the U.S. is seen as an unreliable partner, willing to abandon allies like Ukraine or discard international norms, it emboldens rivals like China, who may conclude that an invasion of Taiwan would meet little meaningful resistance. Think of it like a boxing match. Even with the goal of winning, there are rules against hitting below the belt. These rules exist not just to be fair, but to prevent the sport from descending into a lawless brawl where everyone gets more seriously hurt. So, what are the key takeaways from all of this? First, this isn't a simple disagreement. It's a clash of worldviews. We are seeing a public debate over whether the U.S. should continue to operate within the established international legal framework or adopt a more unilateral, America-first approach to warfighting. Second, the nominees' careful phrasing and refusal to answer direct questions about torture and international law suggest an intentional ambiguity, leaving the door open to reinterpret or bypass these rules under a new administration. Finally, the senator's closing argument makes it clear that these decisions have a domino effect. How America conducts itself in one conflict directly impacts its credibility and its ability to deter aggression in another. In the face of modern, unconventional threats, do the established rules of war need to be rewritten, or are they the very principles that prevent us from becoming like our enemies? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this analysis helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video.